My name is Professor Harmon, and I am the Nursing Liaison at the Greg Graniteville Library of the University of South Carolina, Aiken. Today I'm going to be talking primarily about APA 7th edition with a specific focus on the types of APA that you will need for your NURS421 project. And I'm also going to briefly touch on some of the quality resources and how to access resources for this assignment. The first thing to note is when you are logging into library resources, you're going to be asked to log in. To log into resources, you will first come upon a login page that will ask you to choose how to sign in. Select the first one that says Students, Faculty, and Staff, and then on the next login screen, you're going to provide your credentials. The information you will provide here is your USC Aiken email address and email password. So you'll put in your full email address with the @usca.edu, and you'll also include your USC Aiken email password. If you have any problems accessing this, make sure you reach out to a librarian and we will see what we can do to help get you started. Now for this assignment, you're going to want to focus on quality professional sources and literature. Now, there are quality resources. For example, if you go into the database CINAHL or PubMed available through the Greg Graniteville Library, you'll be able to access a wealth of peer-reviewed journal articles. But you can also use professional web sources. So if you go out on the web and you find something that's done by profession, like the American Nursing Association or the CDC, those are also going to be acceptable web sources. So make sure you're paying attention to who the organization is, and make sure you look at the quality. A lot of times things that end in a .edu and a .gov, those are generally pretty good. .orgs can be good, can be bad. Make sure you're looking at who the author is. And then also .coms look really closely at, because usually they're trying to sell you something and may not be the best quality source. Now there are a couple sources to stay away from. That includes Stat Pearls. Please don't use Pinterest. Pinterest is not a source. Pinterest is an aggregator. Please don't use Pinterest. Also, there is one called Relias ACH Media that is also not an acceptable source. Please don't use blogs or Wikipedia, and don't use secondary sources. And we'll talk a little bit more about secondary sources in a little bit. Now, how do you access all of these great peer-reviewed resources through the Greg Graniteville Library? This may be, you may already know how to do this, but just in case you don't, the best way is to go to the homepage of USC Aiken and either hover over Academics and select Library, or my favorite way, which is the quick way, to scroll down toward the bottom of the page and you'll see this link to the Greg Graniteville Library. Once you're on this page, then you'll be able to come in here and access a number of different resources. For nursing students, what I recommend is that you use the Nursing Research Guide, and that is the 1, 2, 3 tab over in the search bar. You can choose Research Guides, and then from the drop down, select Nursing and hit Go. And this is where you're going to find all your best resources for nursing. And one of the best places to go is under Find Articles, and this is going to have direct links to all of the nursing specific databases that you have access to, including one of the best starting places, which is CINAHL, PubMed. I also really love Science Direct for this class. So try to log in. If you're having problems logging in, again, make sure you're reaching out. Another thing to pay attention to from the home page is if you are having questions, there is an Ask a Librarian button here. There's also an opportunity to chat with a librarian. If you go to Ask a Librarian, you'll have a couple of different options for asking questions. You can call us, you can email us, you can visit the Greg Graniteville Library, and you can also chat with us 24 hours a day, Monday through Friday, and 8 a.m. to midnight on Saturday and Sunday. Note that the librarians there that are 3 o'clock in the morning are some of our off-campus librarians. So if you need to ask me a specific question, I would encourage you to email me, and I will provide my email address at the very end of this session. Now back to the fun stuff, APA. So in this class, you will be using APA 7th edition. APA 6th edition was out for about 10 years, and so if you go out on the web and you start looking for things, you're going to find a lot of stuff relating to APA 6th edition. It's worth noting that 6th edition is very, very different from 7th edition, so make sure if you are finding things on the web that you're using 7th edition. I do encourage you all to utilize the manual or purchase the manual. And at the very end, I'll also provide some links to some really quality APA resources. But make sure you stay away from 6th edition because it is very, very different for 7th edition. With the 7th edition, they really had the student in mind, and they really made a lot of really positive changes that make APA a lot easier in some ways. So again, 7th edition is your friend. Now, the first thing to pay attention to when dealing with APA in your paper is your in-text citation. So these are the citations within the body of your paper where you indicate to your reader that, hey, I have an idea from another source, I'm incorporating it into my paper, and then obviously you'll have something at the very end, the corresponding reference list, but the in-text citation is your starting point for citation. Now with APA, there are two main things to consider. The first is whether you have 1 to 2 authors or 3 or more authors, because this is going to control how you form your citation. And the other thing to consider is whether you're including it as a narrative citation or a parenthetical citation. So we're going to dig into this a little bit more. So if you have 1 to 2 authors, it's pretty straightforward. Every time you have 1 to 2 authors, you list everybody's name out every single time. Now, APA is a name-date citation style. So every time you see a name, you're going to have a date attached right to it. And sometimes we see people try to put dates at the very end of a sentence. Don't put that at the end of the sentence. Just put it right after the name. Now, again, 1 to 2 authors, you write everybody's name out. Now, the two major instances where you'll run into, or how you include citation in APA, is either a narrative citation or a parenthetical citation. A narrative citation is when you include it within the phrase of a sentence. So, for example, you're writing, a study by Bowden 2019 argues, or research by Horn and Harmon 2018 supports. So this is within the body of, or the writing of your paper. Now, the parenthetical citation is a little kind of like an abbreviated citation point. So maybe you don't include the name of the study in the sentence. Maybe what you want to do is just give someone credit, but you don't want to include it within your text. You can just throw a parenthetical citation at the very end of that bit. One other thing to keep in mind is that, again, this is a name-date citation style, so you don't need to put the full name of the study in your paper. We see that sometimes. You don't need to do that. Just put the name and the date. Now, if you have 3 or more authors for your source, what you will do is you will, for the narrative citation, put according to, and then you include the name of the first author, and then follow it by the phrase et al, et space al period, and then the year. That's also the same for the parenthetical citation. You have Harmon et space et al period, comma, and then the year. So those are the founding basics for in-text citations. If you have any questions about them, make sure you reach out, but it is pretty straightforward. Just pay attention to 1 to 2 authors or 3 or more authors. So the next thing we're going to talk about are direct quotes versus paraphrases. I did want to also bring your attention over here on most of the slides. I will either have the section number from the APA manual or the page numbers where the topic is discussed in the APA manual. Now, in the NURS421 papers, as I understand it, you are not to have any direct quotes. So a direct quote is when we pull text exactly from the original source material. You should be paraphrasing, so you should be synthesizing, summarizing, putting things into your own words. So you should be paraphrasing. We're going to talk about that next. But I did want to point out direct quotes because we see some common errors with APA because people kind of merge direct quotes and paraphrases in their citations, and you need to keep it separate. So again, you won't be using direct quotes, but let's talk about what elements are included in a direct quote. For a direct quote, you have the author or authors, the date, you have the exact phrase and quotations, and then you have a page number or paragraph number. For paraphrasing, you will not have a page number or paragraph number. You only use these for direct quotes, and that is one of the big mistakes we see is students want to put a page number or a paragraph number when they're paraphrasing it, putting in their own words. Do not do that. That is a quick way to get some points count off in APA. So if you have a direct quote, which you won't have for this paper, you would use page numbers. And since y'all are paraphrasing, all you have to have is the author and the date. author or authors, and the date. That's all you have to have. And if you're having any problems with paraphrasing, make sure you do reach out to the USC Aiken Writing Room for assistance. So let's talk about abbreviations in APA. In this paper, again, you can use professional organizations, and sometimes what you'll do is have a corporate author. So instead of having an individual person for an author, you can have a corporate author. And when you list a corporate author in your paper, a lot of times those will have common abbreviations. So for example, the American Psychological is the APA, American Nursing Association is the ANA, the National Institute of Mental Health, the NIMH, or the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. So what APA wants you to do is, if you have a corporate author with a common abbreviation, is you need to establish that you're talking about a corporate author with a common abbreviation. And then throughout the rest of the text, you don't have to write out American Psychological Association every time you pull in that corporate author. What you can do is establish it, and then every subsequent instance, all you have to do is put APA 2019 or APA 2019. So let's dig into this a little bit more. The first time you see it is in a narrative citation. So that's when you have research according to the American Psychological Association 2019. You throw in the abbreviation right before the year, and then throughout the rest of your paper, every time you talk about the American Psychological Association, all you have to do is put in either APA 2019, the abbreviated 2019, or APA 2019. And there's not a rule whether you use narrative or parenthetical. It's just a matter of how you're writing at that point. Now, if the first time you see it, it says in a parenthetical citation, and again, this is all stylistic, what you would do is, since you can't have parentheses inside parentheses, is you put American Psychological Association, and then in square brackets put APA, and then on throughout the paper you would just put APA 2019 or APA 2019. And again, all this is on page 268 of the APA manual. Now, one of the things we need to watch out for is something called a secondary citation. So sometimes you'll be reading an individual source, and that source may quote someone else. Now, if you see something that is quoted by someone in that article and you're like, that is the perfect citation, I want to use that, what you need to do is go back to the original source that was cited. And so, because y'all are probably familiar with the telephone game, and the more it kind of spreads, the more kind of the message changes. That also happens with citations. So if you're reading an article, they quote somebody else, and you say that's the perfect citation, make sure you go out and you find that original source and cite that original source. Now, if you need help finding that original source, make sure you reach out to a librarian, and we'll be able to try to help you find that. And if it fits within your date parameters, you should be good. The other time you'll see a lot of secondary citations is in data. So sometimes you'll see like a fact sheet, and it'll have a whole bunch of tables from a whole bunch of different statistical sources. You can't cite that fact sheet because that is just a collection of secondary sources. That is a secondary source with a collection of a bunch of different sources. What you need to do is then go and find where that original data is from, and usually they'll have a citation right underneath the table, and then you can find that original data in its original context and then cite it from there. And again, if you need any help finding that original source, again, this is a great time to reach out to a librarian. So next we're going to talk about numbers in APA. APA has very specific rules for how you report numbers. And again, this is all on page 178 through 179 of the APA manual. You can learn more about numbers than you ever wanted to know. Anyway, so the basic rules for numbers in APA are: numbers 1 through 9 are expressed as words, and numbers 10 and above are expressed numerically. So for example, we have the control group contains 17 participants. Since 17 is of 10 and above, it's numeric. 9 of whom were female and 8 of whom were male. Since this is below 10, these are going to be expressed as words. So 1 through 9, words, 10 and above expressed as numerals. And it wouldn't be APA if there weren't exceptions. And the primary exceptions are ages. Ages will always be numeric. Dates will always be numeric. Time will always be numeric. And then the big category I call math. So if you have something that's a percentage, that will always be numeric. The only exception to the exception is if you begin a sentence. So you never begin a sentence with a number. Well, you never begin it numerically, so you'd have to write out the word, but also it's bad form to begin a sentence with a number. So you probably would never see this, but just be aware. So for example, we had here beginning of a sentence, 48%. We would write that out because that's the beginning of the sentence. And then later in the sentence, we see a lovely low 2%, but that's again not beginning of the sentence, so that would be numeric 2. So 1 through 9 words, 10 and above numerals, unless it's age, date, or math. Ages, dates, and math are always going to be numeric. Okay. Now, one of the things we sometimes see students struggle with is how they balance citation within a long paraphrase. So a long paraphrase is I'm talking about one source throughout an entire paragraph. We see some students come to us and they just throw a citation at the beginning, citation at the end. They're like, we're done, but that's not exactly it. What you need to do in these types of citations is you need to establish via a parenthetical or a narrative citation that you're talking about an individual source. So this is an example of a narrative citation, long 2018 described. So make it clear to your reader that you're pulling information from a source. Now, throughout the rest of the paragraph, instead of having to put an in-text citation on every single line, what you can kind of do is sew a thread and maintain that connection. And as long as that connection is clear to your reader that you're still talking about the same source, you may not have to recite. So, for example, long 2018 described. The author went on to outline. The article listed the following common mistakes. So you can see we're still kind of maintaining that tie to that original in-text citation without having to do that at every single line. Now, you're always going to want to paraphrase, so if you're unsure, always err on the side of oversighting rather than underciting, because underciting can be considered plagiarism. If you start a new paragraph, so we're talking about long in one paragraph, and then, we're still talking about long in the next paragraph. We need to reestablish in that next paragraph that we're still talking about long, because we can't assume that our readers automatically know that we're still talking about long in the next paragraph. And then the other circumstance is if we're switching between sources, so part of the paragraph talks about long and part of the paragraph talks about somebody else, we need to make it crystal clear to our readers who we're talking about. And again, if you are unsure, always err on the side of oversighting rather than underciting. Okay, so that sums up in-text citations and some of the stylistic things that you're going to run across in APA. And now we're going to focus on the reference list. So for the reference list, what they did when they came out with 7th edition is they kind of came out with this model that the reference list citation elements are the who, which is the author, the when, which is the year, the what, which is the title, and the where, which is the source. And all citations will follow this form, the author, year, title, and source. Now let's dig in a little bit more, and first we're going to talk about journal articles with a DOI. So most journal articles published since about 2008 or 2009 will have a DOI, which is a digital object identifier. And if you want to see some more examples, it's on page 317 of the APA manual. So I'm going to break down the citation, talk about all the different pieces, and then I'll talk about how to cite a journal article without a DOI. So let's look at this citation. So the first thing we do is we start with the author or authors. So here's an example of the PDF of the original article that we're looking at. And the first thing we're going to look at is the authors. So in APA, you always include last name, comma, and then the initials, and there's actually a space between the S and the K. And then list all the authors out, and then right before the last author, you're going to put a comma and an ampersand. And then you're going to include the date. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll look for this little citation statement either at the top or the bottom of the PDF. And that's the date I want to include, because the point of citation is to provide retrieval so that whoever your reader is can go through and retrieve that article. So make sure you're paying attention to the right year, not the accepted date or published online date. You want the year that it was actually published. So I include that there. And then the next thing we're going to include is the title of the article. Now, one of the main differences between MLA and APA, and one of the main things that all those citation tools tend to get wrong, is capitalization for a article title. So in this case, what you do for APA is you capitalize the first word of the title, and then if you have a subtitle, which is indicated by a colon, you'll capitalize the first word after that, and everything else is going to be lowercase. So you can see if we copied and pasted this from down here, that would actually be wrong because that has all the major words capitalized. Another thing to keep in mind, if you have a proper noun or somebody's name, that will be capitalized. But again, that's really going to be the only exception. Now, the next piece is going to be the name of the journal. Sometimes you'll see journals abbreviated. APA wants you to put the full name of the journal. And what you'll notice about this is all the major words of the journal are capitalized, which is different from the title. And this is also going to be italicized. Now, you'll follow that with a comma, and then you'll include the volume number. If you only have the volume number, just include the volume number. If you have the volume and the issue number, you'll want to include that. And the next example will show you how to do a volume and an issue number. Now, if I have the volume number, I'm just going to include it here. It is also italicized. Include a comma, the pages of the entire article, and then I'm going to include the DOI. The DOI takes a very specific form for the 7th edition. So for example here, all I have for the DOI is the 10 dot number. For it to be correct for APA 7th edition, all DOI numbers need to start with https://doi.org/ and then the DOI number. We don't want to see DOI : or doi.dx.org. Those are from old editions of APA. Also, we don't want to see anything about EBSCOhost or Easy Proxy. It needs to be just this simple. Now, if you hit enter at the end and it's blue and underlined, that's fine. But we do know that most journal articles will have a DOI number. Now, sometimes you won't have a DOI number, and we'll talk about that situation next. Now, if you do not have a DOI number and you got it through a library database, so this means effectively it means a print version exists. So if you don't have a DOI and you got it through CINAHL or PubMed or anything like that, this is how you're going to do that citation. So you're going to start with the author, the date, the name of the article, the name of the journal, and now one of the big differences is this one. We see how we have 61:4. Sometimes you'll see it like volume or number, but we need to report the volume and the issue for this one. So the volume is 61, the issue is 4, the 61 is italicized, the 4 is not italicized, and there is no space. So 61:4, italicized, not italicized, no space. Then we follow with the full range of pages, and then we put a period, and then we're done. We do not want to see retrieve from CINAHL. We don't want to see a URL. If you found it through like CINAHL or PubMed, all you have to do is cite it like this, put a period, and walk away. Now, that said, we know that most journals published since 2009 will have a DOI. So we will expect to see DOI numbers on most of your reference list citations. Some students are like, well, I didn't find one. I'm just going to leave them all off. You do need to try. So again, since most will have it. If you can't find the DOI, make sure you reach out to either your professors or you can reach out to a librarian and we can help confirm or help you find that DOI for that journal article. But hopefully you'll be able to find it either on at the top or the bottom of the PDF. And again, we do not want to see a database name listed. Again, that's what a lot of the citation tools get wrong. You know, at the end of the day, your citations need to be right. And you can't say, well, I pull it from, Citation Machine or whatever. They make mistakes. Even the citation tool in the library databases can be wrong. You can't trust just because it's a cite this function in CINAHL doesn't mean it's right. At the end of the day, it needs to be right, so make sure that it does adhere to these different rules. Now, there is a circumstance where if you have 21 or more authors in a citation, there's something special that you do. So a lot of times in medical literature, there will be everybody and their cousin will be an author on a paper. So, and this is on page 317, so up to and including 20 authors, you will list all of them. So you list them all out up to and including 20. Now, if you have 21 or more authors, you will list the first 19, followed with an ellipses, which is this ... here, and then you list the very last author. And so this is on page 217, and if you ever end up publishing an article, please don't be the 25th author. Unless you're the last author, don't be the 25th author on a paper, because your name will never be seen. Okay, so 21 or more authors. And let's talk a little bit about books or ebooks. Sometimes, if you're looking at something on like a leadership theory, sometimes those will be published in book form. And you may have an exception to be able to use like the seminal or original time, a theory or a significant work. If it's a little bit older, sometimes you can use those. And a lot of times those will be published in book or ebook form. So I'm going to talk to you about how to cite these. So this citation kind of follows more with how you do with journal articles now. You'll either have a book with a DOI or a book without a DOI. And it doesn't matter if it's an ebook or a print book. It just matters if it has a DOI or doesn't. Now, going through a book citation, you have the author or authors, just like you did with the journal article. You have a date. What you have here is this is a little bit different. So for the title of the book, you're going to list the name of the book. Again, you're going to capitalize the first word and then the first word after the subtitle, and everything else is going to be lowercase unless it's a proper noun. But one of the big differences here is it's going to be italicized. It doesn't need to be blue. Just italicize it. And then after the name of the book, you're going to include the publisher. And one of the big changes between 6th and 7th edition is we no longer have cities and states, so we don't need to know that this was published in London or New York. They don't care. If you have a DOI, you'll need to include that. And again, remember, you start with a prefix of HTTPS, DOI.org, and then the DOI number. But if you don't have a DOI, you just don't put a DOI for books. And we know that most books to this point don't have DOIs. So if you find a print book or an ebook from an academic research database, and again, available through the Greg Ratwell Library, I think we have over 1 million ebooks now. So there's a good chance you can find an ebook. Again, you'll list the author, authors, the date, the name of the book, the publisher, put a period, and you're done. That's all you have to do for a book without a DOI. And again, most books don't have DOIs yet, but it's coming. Now, one of the trickier things is how to cite a website, and you probably will be using professional websites. So let's talk about that a little bit more, because there are some pretty significant differences between 6th edition and 7th edition. So the first one is an example of a web page on nursing excellence from the American Nurses Association. So we have a corporate author, so we list them out, American Nurses Association. There wasn't a date available, so I put N.D. Most likely you will be able to find a date. So if it's just a year, you would just include a year. If it's 2023, you just include 2023. And then a period afterwards. Now for the name of all web pages, they will all be italicized, and they're going to follow the same capitalization rules that journal articles and book titles follow, where you capitalize the first word and everything else is going to be lowercase unless you have a proper noun, and then if you have a subtitle, you would capitalize that too. So no difference there. So we have the name of the web page, which is Nursing Excellence, and then we don't include something right after Nursing Excellence. In most other citations, we will include something in the source element, but we don't need to include anything in the source element because the American Nurses Association website is the source, so we don't have to put it twice. Okay, and then all we need to do is put the full URL to the website. So if your reader clicked on this, it would take them exactly to that page. We do not want to include a retrieve from statement. We don't necessarily, you won't be probably including anything with a date. Sometimes you'll put a date with like a blog or a news letter, that kind of thing, but we don't need to put a retrieve date here. So that would be your entire citation. Now this next example of a resource kind of shows you how to deal with that source element. So if you have something written by an individual, so this is an example of an NPR article Again, you can't use newspapers for this assignment, but I did think this kind of demonstrates it pretty well. So you have something illustrated or written by an individual, but published on the NPR site. So you start out with the author or authors, include them. Since this is a newspaper, you put out by the full date. Then you put the name of the individual web page, but in this piece you put the source. So National Public Radio, the NPR web page is where that was published, and so we have to put the source element, which is NPR. And then what we do is we just include the full URL to that individual page. So hopefully that clarifies. So you will have a source element if you don't have a corporate author, which is the same as the corporate author as in the source. Now, one of the things that gets a little strange is when we start looking at government information. So this is primarily U.S. government information, so this isn't going to be the World Health Organization. But for a lot of the governmental agencies, and this includes the CDC, there is usually the CDC and there's usually a parent organization. For the APA manual, they actually omitted the parent organization, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, but this puts this in line with what they recommend for every other agency. So we'll start out with the corporate author. So in this case, we have the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Now we have the date of the web page. Then we have the name of the web page itself. And then what we include in the piece after the name of the web page is the source element, and in this part is the agency, the parent agency that's responsible. So in this case, we have the Department of Health and Human Services, because the Department of Health and Human Services is the department that oversees the CDC. If you had something for the Census Bureau, for example, you would put the Census Bureau as the corporate author, but then you'd have the U.S. Department of Commerce as the source element. So make sure that you include the parental agency in the source element. And one of the best tips I've heard for helping to indicate, like, I don't know what is the source element. If you usually look in the upper left-hand corner of all government web pages, it will generally list who the parent agency is. And then you just include a full URL to that individual page. Okay, so let's talk about paper format. In the APA 7th edition manual, there are two papers. There's the student paper and the professional paper. You will be following the student paper. In the APA manual, this is on page 61 through 67. There's also a copy of the paper on the APA style page, and there should be a template for you in the Blackboard shell. And if you can't find it on the Blackboard shell, if you go to the Nursing Research Guide and go under Cite Your Sources, there is a sample APA paper down here template that you can actually download and use as a base. But again, I think you should have one in your Blackboard shell. Okay, so let's talk about the APA paper format. For APA papers, you're going to want to have the page number in the upper right of all pages. We do not want to see a running head. That is an APA 6th edition thing. And that's also a professional paper thing. You just need to have, for student papers, the page number in the upper right. Then you come down about 2 or 3 double spaces, put the full title of your paper. You'll want to make sure and capitalize all the major words of your title, and then make sure it's bold. And then you skip down 2 spaces, and then you'll include your name, School of Nursing USC Aiken, the course number and title, your instructor's name, and the date. And then one of our university-specific adaptations for the APA paper format is to include our honor code at the very bottom of the page. Since most people will submit their papers electronically, most faculty members are fine if you just type out your name and type out the date next to it. So make sure you do include an honor code at the very bottom of your first page, and it can be down a little bit further. It doesn't have to be that high up. Now on the second page, you're going to want to make sure again you have a page number, and make sure that the start of your paper comes right up to the header. You're going to have 1-inch margins on all sides, and Times New Roman 12-point font is a good stable font. And then also you're going to want to make sure everything is even double spaced. Make sure there's not extra padding between extra paragraphs. Now, at the top of the first full page of your paper, put the full title of your paper. So you can usually just copy what you typed here and put it right here. We do not want to see the word introduction at the top of your paper. Now, throughout your paper, there are ways to indicate to your reader if you're looking at a major section or a subsection. And they indicate these by level heading. So this is an example of a level 1 heading, and this is an example of a level 2 heading. So what this is usually like the major topic or idea, and this is a subtopic or idea. So for example, if you had a paper and your major topic was obesity, maybe you might have a subtopic, a level 2 heading on the different types of obesity. For this paper, I think you only need to do a level 1 and level 2 headings. You will not be doing level 3. So for a level 1 heading, it is bold and it is centered. All the major words are capitalized and the text begins on the next line. For a level 2 heading, it's going to be left align. All the major words will be capitalized and it will be bold, and all the text will begin on the next line after that. So pretty straightforward, but do know that heading levels are used to help indicate to our readers when we have different sections. Now, your reference page is going to be on a separate page, and the word references is going to be at the very top, and it's also going to be in bold, so you'll just have the word references. It's not works cited, that's MLA. And then you're going to include all of your resources that you used in your paper. Do double check to make sure there's a one-to-one correspondent between your in-text citations and your reference list. Sometimes when you go back and you do edits, you'll remove like a section of your paper, but you won't delete it from your reference list. Make sure you do delete that from the reference list if you're not using it. And again, we want to make sure everything has a hanging indent and that everything is evenly double spaced. If you do have padding between the individual sentences, you're going to want to make sure to open up paragraph and make sure that spacing is before and after is 0, 0, and line spacing is double. A lot of times when you're seeing that extra padding, there'll be like an 8 or something here, which just adds that extra space, and we don't want that extra space. So make sure that it is 0, 0, line spacing double, and that you're using hanging indents, and that all of your reference entries are alphabetical. Okay, so for 7th edition help, a really great site to look at is the APA style site. So this is APA's official site, and it is pretty helpful. They did a really good job at making this useful and helpful, and has lots of great examples. So if you don't have your APA manual, or you just can't find it, if you go to apastyle.org, it will always set you right. It is the page done by APA. In addition to that, we have some handouts, and I'll show you all in a second. There is the quick handout, and then there's some videos and stuff. So if you need more videos than this, you can find more videos. So again, on the Nursing Research Guide under Cite Your Sources, there are links to a number of things, including our little quick guide, which is a quick little reference for you to look at relating to some of the different major reference list citation iterations, and I also have included the parenthetical and narrative citation samples for each of these different sources, so if you need some examples there. And then we also have a much longer video on APA. Shockingly, it's longer. And one final word of wisdom. If you do need a website other than APA Style or our resources, I would encourage you to potentially look at Excelsior OWL. There are some errors at OWL Purdue, so do be cautious. If you use the old OWL Purdue, choose Excelsior OWL over that. It's also done by Writing Room. It's really helpful. So again, my name is Professor Harmon. If you need direct help, please feel free to email me at deborah.t@usca.edu. And again, I won't look over APA papers for correctness. So I'm not just going to review your paper and tell you when you got it right and wrong, but I will help guide you. So if you are running into a sticky situation, you're like, I don't know how to cite this is weird, do reach out and I will push you in the right direction. and show you some good samples and examples that you can model your citations off of. And also, if you're having any research questions, always feel free to reach out to us if there's something you can't find full text or you're having problems accessing the full text. Do make sure you reach out to us and we'll see what we can do. Happy searching!